This is TWiT.
So our picture of the week isn't, as you said, super informative because it is the best resolution I could find, but it's blurry, so I didn't expand it. It's just not very clear, but it does show the interconnection of the various players in this drama. What roles they had, where their identities were used, and so forth. So it's just sort of, it's the sort of thing we see with forensic investigations, where who was in charge of what and who called who and who had which identities and so forth. The details in the text are very clear, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. I did want to mention, as I said at the top of the show, that and also, as I said at the top of the year, about the speculative execution problems, that the problem is like fundamental to the architecture of today's processors. And as I've thought about this more, and I read this paper, these guys, they earned their $100,000, their bounty awarded by Intel for this work. It is the clearest and most, well, I would say damning or worrisome or earth-shaking indictment of any sort of tricks which are played for speculation that I've seen. I would argue they have advanced the state of the art in this paper significantly, and there's really no immediate takeaway for us, because the good news is end users, as we know, have never really been at too much risk. The big risk is where there's the potential to have an adversary sharing the same processor. Well, since in a single user system like we're all using with our laptops and desktops and our mobile devices, we're the only one using it. So if malware is in the device, well, we're already compromised. But in a cloud, in a virtual server, virtual machine cloud environment where the design of the system is multiple customers sharing the same hardware, the problem of cross VM information leakage, which had until the beginning of the year been just assumed because we had implemented the architectures to isolate processes. That process and machine isolation was a given. And it was, the rare exception. I remember there was a floppy driver a few years ago in the VMware where you could give it some weird instructions and break into the kernel. But that was the exception to this isolation rule. Where I'm going with this is that I wouldn't be surprised if moving forward, the only way we solve this problem is by not allowing sharing of a core and the core's resources, which means it's caching also among systems that may be hostile to each other. The whole point of speculation is that this processor learns what it's doing and is better at doing it in the future. That's what caching gives us. It's what branch prediction gives us. It's what all of these tricks where we have where the system only runs at the performance it does because it's remembering, it's taking advantage of the fact that code that has just run tends to run again. Without that, main memory is just incredibly slow relative to the processor speed, which is why we have all these multi-meg caches now in order to bring that local. I just don't see how it's possible to share that without carefully tagging which core owns which items in the cache, which could be done, and possibly just giving up on the idea of a multi-core processor being considered as a symmetric thread pool where anybody can run any thread from any core. It may be necessary to partition in the future, to partition in these environments where hostility is possible, to partition cores to virtual machines so that there just isn't cross-core leakage, because I can't see any way for someone to securely share a single core. And given that we need speculation, unless everything was tagged, and frankly, tagging everything would not reduce performance, and it would solve the problem, but at horrendous hardware expense. That is, right now, the presumption has been there was no need to tag everything. And by that, when I say tagging, I mean identify which process caused what modification for the future, which would again, if the tags match, we reuse what we learned of that process. Another process is not going to be using the same architecture. So we actually could see an improvement in overall performance by heavily tagging what the processor learns about what the processes are doing on it. And we would get a performance benefit because we wouldn't be flushing the what we learn from one process by another, which would be a benefit. But boy, it doesn't really, it's not a conceptual stretch. Everybody knows how to do a fully tagged system, but it would expand the die size and increase the complexity of the hardware significantly. It either that or strict processor partitioning is probably where we have to go. Anyway, so I'll just say that what these guys did, they named these two new findings, which fell out of their very powerful research. They called them Spectre 1.1 and 1.2 because they're related to the original Spectre 1 flaw. Spectre 1 was all about speculative reads. What they realized was speculative stores could be used in a similar fashion. And so they've extended our understanding of the speculation risk significantly by essentially by not missing anything in their analysis. And what's significant to us, or to the industry, is that their approach bypasses the mitigations, with the software mitigations which were put in place to solve the Spectre 1.0 problems, meaning that there is no current protection from what these guys have done. And at the same time, there also never was, as we've said, a huge risk to end users. The risks have been bigger to cloud providers. And so I don't know whether Intel will respond, whether they can. It may be that we'll see another round of software mitigations. We might see more microcode again, thinking that we were finally done after half a year of this microcode mess that we went through. This just happened, so there is yet no real sense. Intel has acknowledged that they, in addition to paying $100,000, they've acknowledged that yes, their systems are vulnerable to these two 1.1 and 1.2 vulnerabilities, as has ARM. AMD so far has been silent, but AMD is traditionally slower to respond to security issues. They're, looking at it, I'm sure, and we'll probably end up saying, yeah, well, this gets us too. Because basically, this is just puts another nail in the speculation coffin, and the paper is amazing. If anyone, again, I've got a link in the show notes for anyone who's interested. It's a tour de force in really understanding the nature of this problem, and argues convincingly that there isn't, as I said, there just isn't a safe way to do this. If something your code does changes the future, and it has to in order to get the performance it needs, then if that changed future can also affect a different process, you've got cross-process information leakage. And as we saw recently, and as these guys reiterated in their paper, things like fuzzing the timing in the browsers only slow down the bandwidth or the bit rate of information leakage. It didn't end it. So it's still a problem. Anyway, really, really great work. And in fact, Bleeping Computer covered this and had on their page a really nice summary of where we've been so far this year with the variant 1, and now we have 1.1, 1.2, and of course we have 2, 3, 3A, and 4. And so it just, and 4 was, remember, Spectre Next Generation or Spectre NG. So no word yet on AMD's effect, nor anyone's formal response. This all just happened, but there's no reason to panic, because as we've seen, even the original problems were more of a computer science concern that we had to take seriously, because everything we've learned says these problems only get worse as they add. And this is what we're seeing. I mean, now, as our understanding 7 months later is continuing to mature, it's looking to be bleaker than we even thought. So hats off to these guys, and they really did earn their $100,000 from Intel. And thank you to Intel for offering a bounty. I'm sure they would have done the research anyway, but this, if it encourages people to spend the time, which was extensive in this case, to understand it, then yay.